Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, politics, government, education, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, on this warm July Friday that we are recording this, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Oh, I'm doing just fine. We'll talk about this in a few minutes. Early voting starting, and so election season is here, and that's always exciting.
Did you early vote on your way here today?
I did not.
Yeah, me either.
It was all I could do to get in the car and get here with...
It is a Friday.
It is a Friday. Yeah, I needed an IV with coffee, but I typically vote on election day.
Yeah,
I'm an election day ritual kind of guy.
Me too. I like it. The first time I ever voted was like that. My dad made like a big point of it. He was like, "You have to actually go and vote."
That's Owen McCarthy, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, sorry,
summer intern joining us here again. Yeah, I know. Like some people do make that ritual, and I totally get that. I'm more in the camp of kind of do it and get it over with, and that way it's been counted, and if you get hit by a bus or whatever before election day, at least you got your vote in. I will definitely be voting early because I'm actually going to be out of the country on election day, which means that Scott and Owen are going to be picking up some slack on covering election returns that night. Sorry, guys. I'll send you my regards from. I'm going to go do some research on the British elections that they just had. So, yes, early voting has started. We'll talk about that a little bit. We also have other election-related things to talk about. We will also look at conversation about the future of the Bauer Field ballparks down off Chapman Highway, a beloved community resource that there is some controversy around. Speaking of controversy, a social media firestorm this week over the future of WUTK and its longtime general manager, Benny Smith. This is an evolving story that may evolve more between the time that we record this and when you all get to hear it, but we'll talk about what we know so far. And also, we'll be looking ahead to the 2026 elections because, hey, we can talk about more than one election cycle at a time, right? But first, let's start with the 2024 election on August 1st. This is the county general election and the primary election for state and federal offices. As Scott mentioned, early voting has started today, Friday, July 12th. It continues through July 27th, and you can find information about polling places and times at knoxvotes.org, which is the website of the Knox County Election Commission. I think there is, Scott, a general assumption that this will be a somewhat low turnout election. It's a little hard to tell who is going to be most motivated to come out and vote in this. We often look to sort of federal or state level races to bring people out, but we don't really have those on this ballot. So who's going to come out and vote here?
Yeah, really, it's the hardcore people who vote every election, regardless. voters are going to be the ones that turn out. Yeah, there's no, the presidential primary was in the spring. We've got there's not the governor's not on the ballot. The Senate race is, both parties pretty much have their candidate lined up.
Right. There is a Democratic primary, we should say, in the Senate race with Gloria Johnson, Knoxville State Rep, and two other candidates on the ballot there. Johnson, widely perceived, she has out-fundraised her opponents by some exponential margin and is clearly the kind of favored candidate of the state Democratic Party, even though they, of course, don't come out and say that during the primary. So that's one thing that could bring out some local Democrats to vote, just to come out and show support for Johnson as she continues her Senate bid. And then I kind of feel like beyond that, the countywide races, law director and property assessor, those aren't races that by themselves drive turnout.
No, they don't. It's not like the county mayor or anything like that. So, or sheriff, those are the ones that really bring people out. So, as I said, it's going to be the people who vote every election, no matter what. It just kind of make it a routine. Like us.
That's right. And especially people who maybe live in specific districts that have particularly competitive races that might drive some people out. And so we have continued this past week our coverage of individual races, as we do before every election, and we will go ahead and talk about a few of those, including one that I do think is a pretty interesting race. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, and including who it's going to turn out to vote. That's the District 2 school board race. This is unusual for a couple of reasons. District 2 is in North Knoxville. It is entirely within the city limits of the city of Knoxville. So it's kind of the rare county commission district that is all in the city. And there is an incumbent running for re-election, which is Jennifer Owen. She has served 2 terms on the board. She was elected in 2016 and 2020. And at that time, the school board was not yet partisan or hadn't returned to having partisan races. So she ran without party label. But she has been one of the more consistently progressive voices on the board on kind of most major issues, especially as the board has become partisan on the kind of big political issues, the hot button issues. Owen much more tends to vote with the other independent on the board, Daniel Watson, and the 2 Democrats. So she's kind of part of that 4-member minority, and there's a 5-member Republican majority on the board right now. But in running for re-election, Owen was very much against returning board races to partisan contests, and she didn't want to run as a party candidate. So she is seeking re-election as an independent, which is an interesting test, really, under this new partisan framework of whether an independent candidate can get elected. That is a pretty Democratic district, certainly has been trending that way. It's represented on county commission by a Democrat, Courtney Durrett. And Owen, interestingly, has a Democratic opponent, Ann Templeton, who is an involved parent, has had children at Beaumont Magnet Academy, and she has said that, she's not criticizing Owen for anything in her record, but saying that she's been there for 8 years, 2 terms, and of course school board members are not term limited. And Templeton just says she thinks it's time for kind of a fresh voice on the school board. She has said a couple of things, about how she thinks she can work well with other board members to get things accomplished that are clearly sort of indirect critiques of Owen, who is certainly not afraid to be a lone wolf and a lone voice on a lot of things, and can sometimes visibly annoy her colleagues on the board. You can definitely see that happen sometimes. And so I think that's a little bit of what Templeton's getting at. But then there's also another candidate in the race, another independent, Pat Paulus, who's a retired pastor who runs some religious talk shows at WRJZ, the Christian broadcasting station there on Magnolia Avenue. And he when I talked to him, acknowledged that he is a Republican. I mean, he basically votes Republican. But when he was approached about running, he said he also didn't want to be a partisan candidate because he didn't think it was appropriate for a school board race, that he doesn't think issues having to do with children ought to be partisan issues. But he did, he didn't quite come out and say that, yes, he would be, probably voting with the Republican majority on things on the school board. But if you're looking at the race and kind of trying to figure out where people fall, he clearly is a Republican-leaning independent in the same way that Owen is a more progressive-leaning independent. And then you have an actual Democrat there, Scott. And I guess this is another one of those ones that'll come down to who actually comes out to vote. Because if it is, as you say, just the hardcore voters, those are probably going to be people who know Owen and her track record, and a lot of people who have voted for her before in that district. She's been elected twice. But if you got people coming out who maybe were less familiar, it is a pretty Democratic district, they might just go for the D on the ticket.
Yeah, that's a real possibility. I think that your first point is probably more accurate in that the people who are going to vote in this election are a little better informed. They've voted before. She's got a recognizable name. But yeah, there are going to be some people who would vote for Templeton just because she's got a D by her name. But I don't think that it's to the same extent that Republicans will vote for somebody who just has an R by their name. I don't because Owen has a record of being a more progressive kind of voice. So, but you never know. I mean, people can go in. Even people who vote a lot may not be paying attention.
Or there could be people who have voted for Owen and also think, well, it is time for another voice. Like, yeah, right. There's just no way to know.
Or they voted for Owen before. They really don't pay attention to the school system and the school board, except when they vote for somebody, and then they go to their polling place and they see Templeton with a D by her name. They say, "Oh, well, I'm a Democrat. I'm going to vote for her."
Right, certainly possible. And of course, the sort of outside possibility here is that you have enough people on the sort of Democratic progressive side, even though that is overall kind of where the district leans. But if they are divided enough, it's always possible. Like, this is exactly how a third party candidate can sometimes win. So, and Polis has actually raised, an okay amount of money. It's interesting. Templeton has by far raised the most money in this race. Polis has raised a decent amount. Owen, at least as of March, which is the last time she reported her funding, had raised and spent very little. However, that has also been true the previous two elections where Owen has won. She was, out fundraised and outspent and still won. So, yeah, just an interesting race. And I'd say there's at least a chance that any one of the three could end up winning.
And Paulus is out there. He's working hard. He's got, in fact, right before I got here, I got a text message from his campaign, so because I live in the same district. So,
and he does have some real Republican support, including former Governor Bill Haslam, one of his contributors. So, Republicans, even though they don't have a designated candidate on the ballot, are clearly kind of motivated to support Polis. We will see. Moving on, in District 5, which is not a Democratic-leaning district, this is out in West Knox County. It includes Farragut, Choteau, and Concord. Those areas, they have competitive races for both the school board and county commission. It's interesting in the sense that both of those seats are open at the same time. Incumbent Susan Horn on the school board has served 2 terms and is not seeking a 3rd term. Incumbent county commissioner John Schoonmaker has served 2 terms, and he is term limited because county commission does have term limits. So both seats are open. We're going to get new faces in both of them. The voting patterns of the district make it, strongly likely that those faces will remain Republican because that's just how that district votes. But an interesting assemblage of candidates. On the school board side, you have Lauren Morgan running as a Republican, and she kind of fits your classic mold of school board candidates. She's a very involved parent with 3 children in the Farragut schools. And, she says her primary concerns are making sure that schools are adequately funded and that they have adequate supplies. She told some stories. The Farragut schools are chronically overcrowded, and so she's had some experiences and stories about the impact of that, including, her daughter at one point working in a learning group that had to meet in a closet, and the kids had to sit on the floor. Whoa. And she kind of made the point that, a lot of people in the county just assume that, Farragut, because it is one of the most affluent parts of the county, and because its schools always perform very well on standardized tests and everything, it's that people think that, Farragut must have everything. It must be, the glitziest, shiniest schools in the county, and that is absolutely not the case, as anybody who's been in those schools in recent years could tell you. The school system is working to address that. There are already plans in place for a new elementary school that should help with a lot of that. So that relief is sort of coming, but Morgan said she's certainly seen the impact of that. She has some students with children with special needs in her own family, and she has seen some of the struggles to get adequate services and resources for special education. So she's attuned to that. She is also, of course, running as a Republican and, kind of espouses conservative family values. She is not, I would say, making a huge push on kind of culture war type issues, but it's pretty clear that very much as Horn has been, I think Morgan would be a solid conservative Republican vote on the issues where that matters on the school board. And she's running against Terry Whitaker, who has been a Farragut parent. Her daughter actually graduated from Farragut High School in 2005, so she hasn't been directly engaged in the school system recently. She and her husband actually moved away for a while because of his work and moved back here a few years ago, and Whitaker had become, during the time they were living away in Colorado, she'd gotten very involved in Democratic Party politics in Colorado, and so when she moved back to Knox County, she got involved here as well. And so she's coming at running for this seat more from the point of view of wanting to provide an option, wanting to provide another voice as a Democrat, as a more progressive, pro-public education, anti-school voucher voice in the race. She just thought it was important that there be a Democrat on the ballot. And she said that as she's been going out, knocking on doors and meeting people, she hasn't gotten a lot of pushback from people over being a Democrat, that people are open to talking to her about issues and everything. But Scott, I think, as I said, this is just a district where I don't think you can never say it's impossible for a Democrat to get elected in some district or a Republican in some other district. But there are times where you can fairly say it's going to be hard for them.
Oh yeah, I mean it's that is as safe a Republican seat as there is in Knox County. Yes, miracles happen, and a Democrat can theoretically win, but it is it's a tough job.
And I think those are the kind of districts that, like the local Democratic Party, of course, they say they're running to win every race because that's what you do, but more realistically, what they're probably looking for in a lot of these races is to kind of make incremental gains over time, and so you kind of shrink that margin over time to where it then at some point becomes achievable. Similarly, in that District 5 commission race, you have Angela Russell running as a Republican, very involved with homeowners associations there, and homeowners groups are probably the single most powerful political force in that district. They are very concerned in the 5th District about, they've been really overwhelmed by growth. Their roads are get pretty bad at rush hour already, and so they're concerned about further growth. Russell was involved in helping lead an effort that we talked about here last year against a proposed affordable housing complex there in the Choteau area that ultimately did fail, not because the government disallowed it. It actually would have been allowed under the existing zoning, but because a private resident out there kind of stepped forward to go ahead and purchase the property and take it off the market and kind of kill that. But Russell,
that tells you how affluent that area is.
But Russell was engaged with that effort, and I think that gave her a base, and she handily won a 5-way Republican primary in March, winning almost half the vote against 4 other candidates. And she is running now in the general election against Democrat Arthur Moore, who's a neurologist and grew up. Russell is a Knox County native. Moore grew up in Greenville, but he's an East Tennessee native who got did his medical training at Vanderbilt, and then went and worked for the Mayo Clinic for a few years. So. His resume is pretty strong on the MD front. And then he said he and his wife really wanted to come back to East Tennessee, and he wanted to bring world-class healthcare to the people of East Tennessee. And so now he's head of neurology for Covenant, and very engaged, obviously, professionally. And again, maybe somewhat like Whitaker, but said that he wanted there to be an option. He and his wife live in the 5th District, and he's a strong Democrat, and wanted there to be a choice on the ballot for people like him who live in the district, who maybe haven't felt represented by the existing representation. And both candidates talk mostly about growth. I mean, that is just undeniably the biggest issue in that district, growth and infrastructure. And one difference between them is on taxes, where neither of them is coming out saying the county needs to raise taxes, which it hasn't done in 25 years. But Russell is adamantly against it. She just says, absolutely not, no way. She would not support a tax increase. Moore is on the side of never say never. You have to get in there. You have to understand what the needs are. There are some looming issues for the county financially. The county debt burden we've talked about. It's going to create some issues in the near future. And so, he's kind of said he hopes that they can kind of grow their way, use smart growth to build the tax base enough to meet their needs. But he said that, it's not realistic to say that you should never consider other options for revenue. Again, not an argument necessarily likely to carry the day in the 5th District.
No, not at all.
And I was just going to add, at that candidate forum, there was a question about AMR and improving response times, and he obviously, because of his background, is very invested in that. And so I think that you can really draw a connection when he's not willing to say outright, I'll never support a tax increase. I think what he has in mind is, if we want to address some of these issues, crumbling infrastructure, something like AMR, which is very close to his heart, I think he's sort of saying we might need to have some tough decisions at some point, and he's not willing to just rule it out. So.
Yep, I think that's right. And, honestly, that's a position that a growing number of candidates in this county commission cycle have moved toward, and not only Democratic candidates. In general, Democratic candidates have been, really nobody is out there just banging the drum saying, absolutely, we have to raise taxes. But Democratic candidates overall have been more willing to say, look, we have to be honest about our needs and our revenues. But there are also some Republican candidates who are saying the same, saying that at a certain point, you do have to go to people and say, if you want this, it's going to cost this, and here's how we would do that. For example, with ambulance service. And in the 5th District, that is, when it comes to the ambulance contract, the 5th District is in the outlying areas where the contractual response times that AMR is supposed to meet are they're supposed to respond to a top priority call, like a heart attack, within 20 minutes. Within the city, that's 10 minutes. And out in those areas, it's 20 minutes, just because the county's big and it's harder to get out there. A lot of people are not really happy about that. And of course, then we get reports of cases where it's not 20 minutes, it's an hour.
Well, that plays into the growth thing. The people who live in Choteau talk about how, if certain times of day, emergency vehicles can't get there.
That's right.
At all.
Right, because you got very crowded 2-lane roads. There's no way through or around. And, I do think that those are the kinds of those conversations have heated up a bit in this election cycle. I think we'll probably hear a lot more of that in 2 years when the county mayor's race is on the ballot. And we're actually going to be talking about that in a couple minutes. But it's been interesting to kind of watch that evolving conversation as you do get more county representatives of both parties saying that, like, at a certain point, if you want things, you have to pay for them. Mm-hmm. And it's not the case that it would be impossible for the county to have an ambulance contract that guaranteed 10-minute response everywhere in the county. It's just that it would be very expensive. It would cost a lot more than what right now the county's only putting a couple $1 million a year out of $1 billion budget into its ambulance service. They could put more into that if they had more to put into it. So those kinds of conversations have I think gained some traction this cycle, and I think we're going to be hearing more about that. All right, Scott, you wrote about a couple of state legislative primaries, which are both interesting because they're on both sides of the ballot. There's one competitive primary on the Democratic side and one on the Republican side. So let's start with House District 15. What's going on there?
Well, that is the Democratic primary that's competitive. The 15th district is reliably Democratic. So the winner of this of the primary is probably just like the Republicans in Farragut, probably going to win. The district is East Knoxville, downtown, Lonsdale, runs like that, and and in South Knoxville. So there's it dips down and takes in the especially the areas along the waterfront and down to Vestal and Colonial Village. That's about as far as it goes. But got incumbent Sam McKenzie. He was first elected in 2020. Then he was and he's running for re-election now. It looked like he was going to be unopposed, as he was in 2022.
Unopposed in the primary.
In the primary, yes. And it looked like he was going to be unopposed again. He seems to be popular in the district. He's gaining, with it because he's a Democrat in the legislature. He's already gained some seniority because there's so few of them. He's the chair of the Black Caucus in the legislature. But then Daisha Lundy, who is a county commissioner who decided she wasn't going to run for re-election, and she announced that last year, in March of this year, said, "Oh, I'm going to run against McKenzie for the 15th district seat." It kind of took a lot of people by surprise, and so she's running against him. It's an interesting dynamic. There, a couple of the big kind of issue that has come up is that McKenzie is a staunch public school advocate. He is vehemently opposed to vouchers. He's not thrilled about charter schools. Lundy, on the other hand, is an advocate for charter schools, and in fact, she's on the board of Knoxville Prep, which is one of the going to open up this fall. The question is about vouchers, because Bill Lee, Governor Lee, had a voucher proposal last year where families could get was it $7,000 to apply toward private school tuition if they so chose, and she's been very coy about that. She says that she is still studying the issue. She just hasn't taken a stand on it, which McKenzie says, come on, it's one of the biggest issues that we're facing, and you're not taking a stand on it. One way or the other, take a stand. But she hasn't. She says she's studying the issue. She actually posted on Medium website a short essay about her thoughts on school vouchers, and essentially she didn't come out and say. I mean, she's very non-committal. She didn't come out and say that she supported them. She did say that she could if there was some accountability for the schools, which wasn't the case in Lee's proposal, and it didn't. She wants a separate funding source so it doesn't affect the funding of the schools, public schools. Anyway, but she couched it in, I could support it if this happened, but we'll see. She is. She came under some criticism for a flyer that an advocacy group, a school choice advocacy group, sent out on her behalf. This group, actually more of a charter school advocacy group, although many of the candidates they support also support vouchers. So.
Right, that's Tennesseans for Student Success, which is generally seen as kind of part of the constellation of nationally funded groups we have in Tennessee who have pushed for both charters and vouchers, and it's very much part of that ideological universe.
Yeah, but their focus is on charter schools, and they don't. On their website, they have an essay that they put out that says, okay, there are two different things. There's charter schools, which are public schools that are independently operated, and then there are vouchers. They're two completely different things. Everybody throws them under the same umbrella, but they're two different things, and they do. They are primarily that way. Although. Probably if you talk to the individuals, they may, wouldn't surprise me if they were all pro vouchers as well, but that's not what the organization is aimed at anyway. But nevertheless, Lundy is very coy about that, and McKenzie is not. He is adamant about keeping. Fully funding public schools, paying teachers more, doing the things that need to be done to improve public schools rather than finding alternatives to them.
Right. Well, and ever since Lundy got in the race, local Democratic Party officials have basically accused her of having been recruited by and being a shill for school choice, charter school, voucher proponents, and she has never exactly denied that. I mean, I asked her about that early on, and she kind of shrugged and said, well, that's kind of a, it's just kind of a pathetic argument. But she's never like 100% distanced herself either, obviously, as you're saying. And, the Democratic Party is supporting McKenzie because parties will get involved and support incumbents in primaries. That's kind of, it's like an implicit deal. Like if you get elected as a Democratic Party official, then the party will support you even if you do get a primary challenge. And so even though Lundy is also a Democratic office holder right now serving on county commission and had the support of the party when she ran for county commission, the party has been very strongly supportive of McKenzie and has raised lots of questions about what exactly is going on with this Dacia Lundy candidacy.
Yeah, and another key to this is, East Knoxville is majority minority area. It's kind of the core of the district, and he has the support of most of the political establishment and the ministers and such in the district, and so. He's going to be, he's a formidable candidate. It was kind of, one of the things I asked Lundy was, hey, you had a safe county commission seat. you would have been, you probably would have been unopposed to the Democratic primary. There might have been a token Republican run against you, but then you left that, and then you're running against an incumbent Democrat who's fairly popular. So, what gives? And she just said that, her decisions were separate. She said that she had done as much on county commission as she thought she could do, and she decided to leave that alone. And then those famous people who approach you to suggest you run for office, and came and asked her if she would.
Has that ever happened to you? People, you're right. Every time someone runs for office, they say, "Well, I was approached." I'm like, "Who are they?" Like, Scott? Has anyone ever come up to you and said, "Scott, we really need you. Your country needs you"?
Actually, one person has. Former Mayor Victor Ashe, who says that to everyone. Yes. He tries to encourage everyone to run for office.
Victor likes people to run for office.
Yes, he's quite the.
What office did he imply you should run for?
I think it was city council. I think so. He did. It was just, who knows? It was just Victor saying, you ought to run for office.
Jesse, have you been approached?
I have not, and I'm happy to keep it that way.
Yeah, I could have dismissed Victor out of hand. No.
I mean, if a friend just comes up to you and be like, "You know what's going on, you should run for office," does that count as somebody approaching you?
Yes,
or?
I think that is often what people are talking about.
Yes.
And, I think sometimes, and I'm not saying this was the case with Lundy, but, sometimes these conversations are more like, "Hey, I'm thinking about running for office," and, your friend or spouse or whoever says, "Oh, yeah, that might be a good idea." Then you can say, "Well, people really encouraged me."
Right. Okay, then in that case, I have been encouraged multiple times.
I encourage you, Seth.
Thank you.
Run for
on the record, here we go.
Okay, well, so then we also have another very different primary in the state Senate 6th district. Different set of players, different party. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is a Republican seat. Again, though, we've got an incumbent who is very popular. At least she wins elections by large amounts. In Becky Duncan Massey, she is, kind of the establishment candidate. She's from the Duncan family. Her father and her brother represented the Knoxville area in Congress for more than 50 years. And so she's very much steeped in Republican politics, and she's been in office since 2011, when she won a special election to replace a senator who resigned to take another position. And she is also usually unopposed in the primaries. She's been unopposed since that election in the primaries. But a business owner named Monica Irvine who's never run for public office, is challenging her. She is a former board member of Tennessee Right to Life's Knox County chapter, and she makes no bones about the fact that the reason she's running is she got mad because Massey voted to add exceptions for rape and incest to Tennessee's abortion ban. And she, then she said she looked at the record and she doesn't think that Massey is sufficiently conservative, and she that's a charge. A lot of that's happening in a lot of places where where people kind of on the far right of the spectrum go challenge establishment Republicans and say that they're not conservative enough, or they're not not true Republicans, Massey, of course, says, of course she's conservative, and but she also has, more than that, she talks about how effective she is, and she is pretty effective. I mean, that's the, she's on the healthcare committee in the Senate and the transportation committee.
She chairs the transportation committee.
And one of the things is she persuaded the Lee administration to look at revamping the Interstate 40 75 corridor through West Knoxville, and look at it as the entire corridor, not just fix a couple of exits and call it a day. She did that because that's a very powerful position in state government. I mean, road contracts have traditionally been a big source of support, shall we say?
Especially from road contractors.
Yes, and then the healthcare committee. She was one of the driving forces behind getting a study done to gauge whether a new psychiatric hospital would be built in the Knoxville area, which is something that people have been clamoring for ever since Lakeshore Mental Health Institute closed down a decade ago. So she really touts that as her thing, that she's a conservative pragmatist who gets things done. And Irvine is she is very again, her primary focus is abortion, and she talks about that. She's very very religious. She talks about her faith a lot. She has an interesting take on business incentives. She doesn't think that the state should be in business with in partnership with private companies, and in fact, the only incentive that the state should have is the low tax rate. Mm-hmm. No giveaways to Ford Motor Company, for instance, or partnerships in the choice lanes, which is one of the features of the I-40 75 corridor study that the state's conducting now.
Right,
so
kind of the toll roads, of
the
sort that we've talked about.
Okay, so similar to the District 18 that we were talking about with the party support of a candidate that's an incumbent kind of stuff. Full disclosure, this is my district, so I paid a little bit more attention to it than others. But do you get the sense at all that the party at large is leaning one way or the other in support? Because from what I've seen on it, it seems pretty like standard hands-off. We don't pick a candidate until the candidate's picked for us, and then we support. Just sort of the dichotomy of that versus the 15 we were talking about a second ago.
Yeah, I haven't seen the party structure, the party, itself step in. However, Massey has a huge fundraising lead. She's got a huge network of people. All of the major Republican donors almost all of the major Republican donors in Knox County are donating money to her. And
right, and when we say huge fundraising lead, we're talking about by an order of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, she's got a couple $100,000 up on.
My mailbox can attest to that.
And the one thing is Irvine. I can't remember the total now. She raised, like the first round, she raised. She had $66,000 in her account. $51,000 of that was money that she loaned the campaign. So she's actually raised a lot less than what's in her campaign account, and if we were if dollars were votes, then Massey would easily win. So.
Well, when I spoke to Becky, she's feeling pretty confident about this primary, and maybe in that part of that sense as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, similarly to the District 15 primary, although for somewhat different reasons, if she were to lose, if Massey lost this, I think it would be perceived as a real upset, and it would be a real win for the kind of more hardline ideological wing of the Republican Party here. She is very much an ideological warrior. We kind of, and I think we're starting to see more of this in both local and state races here, where the divisions on the Republican side tend to be along the lines of people who are a bit more establishment. I mean, Massey is kind of about as establishment as it gets, and have the support of your traditional donors and power bases and everything. And it, she is a conservative, and she's always called herself a conservative, and her voting record is mostly quite conservative, although, of course, Irvin picks out a couple of things where she thinks she hasn't been conservative enough. But then you have your real ideological combatants, and we talked about this like in the District 9 County Commission race, where the Republican candidate there, Andy Fox, is really a candidate like that, and so is Monica Irvin, where they're there to fight battles, slay dragons, and in the dragons of encroaching liberalism, Marxism, socialism, and so forth. And there's sort of no end point to this. I saw the other day, there's a guy out of Chattanooga who publishes online under the banner of the Tennessee Conservative, and it's sort of like a very conservative website. And he had a broadside attack on what he called rhinos in the Republican Party, which of course are Republicans in name only. It's become a very popular way to criticize other Republicans for not being conservative enough. And he had this long list of people who he considered rhinos. And it started with people who have certainly been attacked for that before, like Massey, like Richard Briggs, our other state senator here, who have kind of hewn to somewhat more moderate stances on some issues. For example, both Massey and Briggs have supported expanding Medicaid. Both Massey and Briggs have in the past opposed vouchers, although Massey at least has kind of evolved on that issue. She did vote for a version of Bill Lee's proposal on vouchers this year. But then he just kind of kept going, listing all of the rhinos until he got to Jason Zachary in Farragut, our own state rep in Farragut here. And Zachary is by far the most outspoken conservative member of our local legislative delegation. He authored the bill that passed this year that made it a crime for any adult to assist a minor who is not their own child in obtaining an abortion. I mean, Zachary is an ideological warrior. He has been the whole time he's in office. And I was just kind of thinking, if you get to the point where you're calling Jason Zachary a rhino, who's left? Like, who even counts as a Republican anymore? And so, there's this kind of endless push. And so I think if somebody like Monica Irvine won this primary, that would certainly be seen as a big victory for the people on the side of just kind of this relentless drive to push the Republican Party essentially farther and farther to the right, all the way to the horizon line.
Yeah, and one of the things is this district it's a huge geographically speaking district. So it goes from Halls to East Knox County, to South Knox County, and then out West Knoxville along north of the river, south of Kingston Pike, all the way to Concord. Some of those precincts are the reddest precincts in the county. So it'll be interesting to see if, for instance, kind of track how Andy Fox does, for example, in the South Knoxville precincts, and how Monica Irvine does, and see if how they track.
Mm-hmm. Right, and State Senate 6 is definitely one of those districts that the primary is the election. There is a Democrat challenger that we'll see in November, but it is even more. It would be even more of an upset if the Democrat won State 6.
Absolutely.
In the November ballot.
Yeah. Now, I do think that if Irvine were the Republican on the ballot, you would probably see some fall off in Republican support, because I think there are still significant portions of the Knox County Republican Party who are not that kind of far out on the spectrum. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those people would vote for the Democratic candidate either. You might see some people opting out of the race, even if Irvine is the nominee here.
Especially because the president.
Right. And exactly. It's going to be the November election where you're going to get that very partisan turnout. So the Republican candidate, whoever it is, will obviously be the favorite in this district.
Yeah, the people who are going to vote for president but don't pay attention to anything else will go in, and they're the ones who are more likely to vote for somebody because they have an R or a D by their name.
Yeah.
So.
And I wanted to point out, we talked about Irvine being a sort of like ideological combatant. Just to kind of paint the fuller picture, one of my favorite details from the story is that, we mentioned she's a business owner. The business is called Etiquette Factory, and it teaches etiquette and life skills. So think like the scene from Borat.
Right.
I just thought that was it tracks. It checks out that is her business. I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's honestly, I was impressed that it's possible to have an etiquette business in 2024.
Yeah,
because I feel like the I don't know if you want to say erosion, because that sounds pejorative, but let's say the shifts and changes in public and social decorum over recent decades have certainly not been in the direction of more etiquette.
Apparently there's still a market for it, and she's found it. So.
Yeah, well, and one thing, I mean, he kind of jibes with the, her conservatism in that, the idea that etiquette matters, that, kind of old-fashioned values kind of thing. And she talked a little bit about, when I interviewed her, she talked a little bit about that. She's DeMonica Bryan is the Democrat who's going to be running. She said she was at an event with her. They get along real well. She enjoyed, she talked about how, her, that enables her to, get along with other people. That the, she also said, and this was kind of funny, that, she, as someone who teaches etiquette, running for office is very difficult because she's got to talk about herself all the time. And when you're a lady, you're not supposed to talk about yourself.
Right.
You're supposed to be about other people, not about you.
Oh. Seen and not heard.
Yeah, so she said she's been violating a lot of etiquette rules
Wow.
by running. But she is she's very sincere. She's very passionate about the issues she's passionate about, and she does just have a real uphill battle against Massey.
Yeah, that was my take as well. Like, she is 100% authentic in what she's saying. This isn't a politics tool to use on the trail to get to get attention. This is how she actually feels about the issues.
Yeah.
And I think that was my biggest takeaway in talking to her, is that this is real to her. This isn't the game of politics. This is, I'm trying to get these things done.
It's who she is.
There are people like that in politics. I feel like we lose sight of that. Like, there are people who they really believe the things that they believe.
All across the political spectrum,
Yeah.
for sure. All right. Well, guess that wraps up our election discussion for today. Early voting is going on, and we should mention that at Compass, as usual, we have moved all of our election coverage outside the paywall. So even if you are not a subscriber, or you have friends and family who are not subscribers, you can go and read everything we've written, and you can share it with anybody you want to. You can find, we have a voter guide on our website that has links to all of our coverage, and all of that is outside the paywall. So please feel free to read and share.
Well, and it's at CompassKnox.com.
It's at CompassKnox.com. That's right. All right, couple other sort of interesting items this week. Bauer Field is a Knox County park down. It's a park facility in South Knox County off Chapman Highway, almost all the way to the county line. Like, this is in deep South Knox County. And it has been well used for many years there. I think it goes back to the 1940s as ball fields. And it's a cluster of ball fields. They have both baseball and softball fields there. And it is operated by the county, but the county doesn't own the land. And also, most of the actual programming there is handled by a volunteer athletic association that actually runs the baseball and softball leagues. But the property was bought a few years ago by developers Thunder Mountain as part of a much larger set of properties that they have acquired down there in the Dry Hollow area for both residential and commercial development. And we've talked about some of those plans before because they have generated a lot of opposition from local residents in what is still a quite rural part of the county who are concerned about, I mean, these are properties right off of Chapman Highway, but the surrounding roads, including Sevierville Pike that comes through there, are still, narrow, winding, rural 2-lane roads. And so there's a lot of concern about the impact of development there. And so kind of everything that Thunder Mountain wants to do in that area has been controversial with surrounding residents. And that includes their plans for Bauer Field, which are basically and Scott, they just, Thunder Mountain was just at Planning Commission on Thursday applying for and got approval from Planning Commission to actually rezone this Bauer Field property from agricultural to commercial. So they clearly have plans to do commercial development there. But the big question has been, well, what about the ball fields? And so in an effort, I think, to kind of head off that question and the community outcry ahead of this rezoning, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and other county officials had an event this past week to announce the future of Bauer Field. And the future of Bauer Field is to basically demolish it, but to relocate the functions of it elsewhere on this property that Thunder Mountain owns, because they own hundreds of acres there. And so Thunder Mountain has donated now. This has actually already happened. They've donated 107 acres to the Legacy Parks Foundation. Most of that, about 86 acres, are along a ridge that runs in the south of the property. And that is property that would be difficult to develop anyway. I think that they could build some number of housing units there, but at a very small unit per acre ratio. And obviously that's not the prime developable property that Thunder Mountain's focused on. So they're kind of donating the ridge, and there could probably be some biking or walking trails there. But then they're also donating about 20 acres kind of in the middle of the property for county parks facilities. And the idea is that they can do the ball fields, build new ball fields there. And then there will also be room for other parks amenities, because the current Bauer Field site is only about 6 acres. And so we're talking about 20 acres here. So they could obviously have room for the ball fields and then do other things. And Jacobs and other officials said that there will be a public process with the community, with the local residents, to talk about what they want to see there. And they painted it as, it's going to be bigger and better than the existing ball field, including that one issue with Bauer Field as it is right now is you have to park on the west side of Chapman Highway and cross Chapman Highway, and there's not a light there, to get to the ball fields now, which is clearly not the safest thing.
It's not ideal, no.
And also, the ball fields are right next to Chapman Highway, and County Commissioner Carson Daly, who represents the area and who supports this plan, noted that, I think it was last year, a pickup truck went off the road there and landed in one of the ball fields. Now, it wasn't during game time or anything. Nobody was there, but he was just kind of making the point that this is not the safest place to do this. And so by moving it to a more interior part of this property, it would be farther away from Chapman Highway. They say it'll be safer. Residents who have been suspicious and skeptical of Thunder Mountain at every step very much remain so, however, and they came out to this event where Jacobs was talking about this, and pretty much heckled the county mayor all the way through the whole presentation and just kind of yelled at him that he was in the pocket of developers and he just wants their campaign donations for his run for governor. And there was a lot of talk about, that land's no good. It's all swampland anyway. And I talked to Carol Evans, who's the executive director of Legacy Parks, which has now taken ownership of this, and asked her about flooding and so forth. And she kind of said, we just got this property, so we're going to take a look at it. Obviously, there will have to be hydrological studies. But they are broadly confident that they'll be able to actually, build this facility there, and that whatever the community naysayers are saying right now, give it time, it'll all work out. And also, this is going to take a while. County officials said that Bowerfield will probably continue operating in its current site for another 6 or 7 years, while all the various other kinds of development that are part of the plan happen around it. So there will be time for them to kind of figure out the best use of that property. But it just kind of, again, illustrates these ongoing tensions between growth and development and existing residents and concern about infrastructure that we see all over the county.
Yeah, the lease that the county has runs for another 7 years, so they there's no money that exchanges hands, but the thing is, it all depends on how fast the new ball fields are built. Once if the county builds those within 3 years, then they'll go. They probably will go ahead and start using them after 3 years, and Thunder Mountain will be able to use that, then convert that the ball fields, but they can keep it for 7. So,
and part of that's going to be funding, because I don't think that project is currently part of the county's capital plan. So it'll have to be budgeted at some point.
Yeah. That's one of the things that a lot of this has happened quite a bit, in that developers will take the ridge tops and donate them to Legacy Parks to transfer to the county, or in the case of Belltown, which is in North Knox County, the area along Beaver Creek will donate. But it's one thing to donate land to the county, or eventually to the county, usually through Legacy Parks, so they can get a tax write-off. But then there's developing the park. That's all up to the county, and so they probably, they'll have to prioritize which parks they want to develop, more quickly. But what it was interesting. You talked about the people at who came out to who lived out there who came out to heckle Jacobs. Whenever Thunder Mountain's been coming to Planning Commission and eventually County Commission, on a regular basis, with new tracts of land, getting them rezoned and whatever. And typically the residents from Dry Hollow will show up and argue against whatever it is that Thunder Mountain wants to do. Thursday, nobody showed up.
About the rezoning.
And there are actually 2 rezonings. One was this property, which, as you said, is right on Chapman Highway, and they wanted to rezone it for commercial use, which passed. And as long as they keep the commercial use to the front of the property, which fronts Chapman Highway. But there was also another swath of land that was a rezone for residential use that's nearby. It's not the same, not part of the same piece of property. So, but there was no presence of Dry Hollow people there. So,
right. Maybe at this point they feel like people can just stipulate that if Thunder Mountain's involved, they're against it.
Yeah. Well, you pretty much can say that, but this will, Thunder Mountain they've got some land on the other side of Chapman Highway as well, So they're, obviously don't know what their plans are yet. They're just what they could do with it. But obviously they think that there's a market for more intensive commercial use along Chapman Highway there.
Sure. All right. Well, another interesting issue that kind of came out of nowhere this week, it exploded across social media on Wednesday, has to do with the future of WUTK and its general manager, Benny Smith. WUTK, for those not familiar with it, is at 90.3. It is the college radio station of the University of Tennessee. And like college radio stations kind of typically across the country, it features a range of programming, much of it led by students and student DJs, tending toward, kind of hipper, cooler music of various kinds. It also has a whole range of different kinds of regular shows during the week, everything from sports talk shows to, specific genre shows in funk and hip hop and Americana, and you kind of name it. WUTK has for a long time now occupied a specific place in kind of the Knoxville cultural universe. It does serve obviously as a training ground for student DJs, but especially under Smith's leadership, and he's a UT grad himself who came through working at WUTK in the 80s, and he's been general manager of the station now since 2004. So for the past 20 years, has really been committed and devoted to nurturing and supporting the local music scene in Knoxville. They have a weekly show called Locals Only that spotlights different local acts, and they also play local bands as just part of their regular programming. You can have the station on and hear any number of local bands just in their regular playlist, because that's something that Smith has always been personally a big booster of the local music scene. And there are just almost countless local bands, musicians, and also local people involved in radio who got their training at UTK, who will speak in just totally glowing terms about Benny Smith and his commitment to Knoxville and to Knoxville radio and to Knoxville music, as a sign of his, when we wrote about this in Friday's email, I used the word beloved to describe Smith, and that is a quantifiable adjective, because he was just voted Knoxvillian of the Year by the readers of Blank newspaper, the monthly arts and culture paper, which runs a Knoxville's Finest poll every year where people get to vote for their favorite things in a bunch of different categories. But the big one is Knoxvillian of the Year. And, previous people who have won that are people like local mayors or local coaches and that kind of thing. Benny Smith is at that level for a lot of people. And interestingly, just a week or so ago, when he won that, University of Tennessee social media was full of congratulations to our own Benny Smith, elected as Knoxvillian of the Year. Well, this past week, he was placed on administrative leave. And again, this story is kind of still in progress. And so things could be happening right now as we're talking. By the time you hear this on Sunday, his status as an employee on leave at the university may well have been resolved one way or the other. It does, and so as word spread that Smith had been placed on leave, it spread across social media. The university never, at least to this point, never even confirmed that. Literally, all they would tell me when I asked them, what's the status of Benny Smith in WUTK, was Benny Smith is an employee of the University of Tennessee. And I said, well, yes, I know that. Aware of that. He has been for a long time. But what's going, is he on leave? What are the plans for the station? And just total silence from the university, at least to this point, on those questions about what's actually going on here. However, lots of people are talking, lots of rumors are flying. It does seem clear that there are plans for changes to WUTK, which is part of a broader realignment at the university. WUTK has recently been kind of placed under the overall auspices of WUOT, which is the public radio station also housed at the university. And both of those are under the umbrella of the College of Communication and Information. And the way I've heard that whole kind of consolidation described is as a way to really incorporate those stations, which are university assets, into more strongly into the student-focused work of the university and of the college. And so, while it is true that WUTK has always had student DJs and there is a lot of student training that goes on there, it has also been kind of operating as its own entity. That has been at the direction of the university, which has basically declined to ever really fund that station to any degree. Smith has had to do most of his own fundraising to keep the place going. And so it's not that the university's been really devoting a lot of resources to WUTK. They do let them use the basement of Andy Holt Tower, but that's not prime space, let's say, as anybody who's been down there knows. And I think that the idea here is that, well, we have these radio stations and we ought to use them as the university in a more focused way to serve the needs of our students. I think that's a lot of what's going on here. But it seems like that vision is maybe a bit at odds with the reality of what WUTK has been now for decades, which is not just a university asset, but a cultural and community amenity. WUTK has a very strong place in the Knoxville community, and especially in the Knoxville music scene. And so I think that was the reason there was this real outcry and outrage even before and while people still don't know exactly what's going on, what is the story that's happening here, but great concern because people see it as so valuable. And there are so many people in Knoxville who can attest to, how important it's been to them.
Yeah, and one thing that's kind of interesting is that for decades, UT was kind of criticized for being very insular and not, it was very much a town gown divide where they, had little or nothing to do with city government or anybody else. But that's changed recently, I think, especially under Chancellor Donde Plowman. The city is in the university has been reaching out and understanding that it's part of the larger community and part of the city of Knoxville, and not just some kind of jelly in the jelly-filled donut. It's
for example, they're going to be leasing the Southern Railway Depot for their architecture program.
Yeah, and they're if it ever gets built, the pedestrian bridge across the river. So, so this is kind of at odds with that because that is the one, or not the one, but one of the connections with the city, between the city and the university. When I say the city, I mean the population of the city,
the community around it. Yeah,
probably one of the strongest connections that UT had in the past and still has, and now they're making all these other connections with the city, with the community, and pulling back on this. I think it's really strange.
It's interesting that you bring that up because that is at the core of why I find this really interesting because I'm an outsider, and so where I go to school, Michigan State University, there is no town really to speak of other than the campus. And so everything, it does feel like East Lansing is almost synonymous with Michigan State. And I like that. People seem to like that. But when I got here at the beginning of the summer, I was driving around with my grandmother, who is a UT grad, a native, or has been in Knoxville for decades. And I asked her, because we were going through the campus, And that was kind of like a small part of our Knoxville tour. And I asked her, I was like, how conscious are you in your day-to-day life of the fact that like you're living in a college town, you know, and a college town that like you went to that college? And she was like, I don't really think of it. Like, it doesn't cross your mind that much. And so I, as an outsider, have always had this feeling of like, yeah, the university is a little bit insular, even though they've made some of these strides. But then, yeah, this move does seem to be like leaning into that insular thing a little bit. So I find it interesting.
Yeah, and one of the things that they've done is apparently dispensed with all of the community volunteer DJs who have been at WUTK now, some of them for almost 20 years. And, you know, these are people who come into the station and fill slots on the schedule, including during the many times that the university isn't in session or during particular times of week when students are less enthusiastic about coming and being there. And a lot of the folks who do that are themselves UT grads, but they're people who live in the community and they're unpaid and they come in and do shows there. And several of them have very well established shows with strong followings that are very popular in the community. And they have all been told, they received an email on Thursday from the station management, such as it is now, since Smith is on leave, at least as of right now, basically saying in not at all friendly terms. I mean, it did say thanks for your service, but it basically said we've got it from here. From now on, this is going to be students and staff running the station, and we will let you know about any future needs that the station may have. And you know, some of these are shows that two of the community DJs, Rob Levering and Derek Senner, were at this event at Barley's on Thursday night where a lot of this got talked about publicly. And they got up on stage at Barley's and said they've basically been shut out, locked out of WUTK. And Levering said, you know, we're coming up on 1,000 episodes, and almost 1,000 episodes of this weekly show they do called The Funhouse, which plays, you know, punk and hard rock and metal and so forth. And so it's like after almost 1,000 shows, all of this unpaid, mind you, but, you know, keeping music on the airwaves and building an audience. They bring in bands that come to town, come and appear on their show and so forth. Just kind of totally given the cold shoulder and told, you know, thanks but no thanks.
Yeah.
And so that you know, it's clearly, we will see how it shakes out, but certainly it's already generating some ill will in the community. And it's also possible, Scott, that university leadership might not care that much about that. They might say, well, you know, sorry about your little station, but we have a university to run and we're going to use it to actually serve the students who are here. And that's our primary need. And our primary role is not to provide a community resource in the way that WUTK has been.
Yeah. You know, it could be that. I don't know that there is, you know, this whole, you know, an influx of people who want to be DJs and do things like that to replace the volunteers. But one thing that, you know, certainly could be, you know, it is a university station. It is primarily for training, you know, engineers and DJs about how to work in radio, which is a great thing. But you know, as we mentioned, you know, UT has really started being more of a member of the community, and when you get out of the radio station to get to Dondi Plowman's office, you know, she might be a little bit more responsive to community concerns. Don't know. I'm not going to say she is, but or will be in this circumstance. But with the attention that this has generated, it's certainly I would be shocked if Plowman did not at least know what's going on and is looking into it. Now, it doesn't mean anything's going to happen, but this is one of those things that most of the time, at this level, this is not something changes at the student-run radio station. That's not anything that would normally come to the chancellor's attention or come to Randy Boyd's attention, especially at the system office. But when you've got the community reaction is it's going to land on our desk.
Yeah, and I actually at Barley's last night, I heard a fair amount of conversation about Randy Boyd, because in addition to being the president of the University of Tennessee, Boyd and his family are major property owners in the Old City, in one of the main entertainment districts of Knoxville, and the places that they own are also very important to the local music scene. Boyd's Jig and Reel, which is run by Boyd's wife, Jenny Boyd, is a real center of especially kind of folk and Americana and bluegrass music. Barley's, where this event happened, where people were standing up and speaking, that is owned by the Boyd family.
Yeah.
And so there were people there saying, well, surely the Boyds are committed to local music and understand its importance in sort of the cultural fabric of Knoxville. And so I think there was some thought or hope there that, well, maybe an appeal at that level might make some kind of difference.
Well, who knows? It could. Boyd or Plowman, it would be the first time that a CEO essentially has reached down to the branch office and demanded changes once they found out.
Yeah, well, we will see, because it seemed likely that there was going to be further official action on this particular issue today, Friday, when we're taping this. And so if you want to know if anything happened or what happened, we will, if anything does happen, we will write about that on Monday, and we can come back and talk about it next week. But just one of those issues that had a whole lot of people talking and a whole lot of people mad this week. All right, one other thing I wanted to mention. We talked a lot about the 2024 election. Scott, are we ready to talk about the 2026 elections?
Well, Jesse, it doesn't matter what we want. What matters is what is thrust upon us sometimes.
That's right. And one of the things thrust upon us this week was a campaign finance report from County Commissioner Larson Jay, who is running for county mayor in 2026. And the reason that he was eager to circulate this particular report is that in the first 6 months of his campaign, so this report covered January 16th through June 30th, he raised I'm not sure what the technical term is. I'm going to go with boatload. He raised a boatload of money, $273,000, which he put out a press release that said that his campaign had gone back and looked at previous county races and could not find anybody running for a county office who has ever raised that much money in a 6-month period. I have not gone back to fact check them, but I have been covering and paying attention to elections for a long time here, and I believe that is probably correct, because that is a huge amount of money to raise in a 6-month period. It is also a huge amount of money to raise 2 years before anybody is actually going to be able to vote for him on the ballot. And Jay does have already a declared opponent in that race. County Criminal Court Clerk Mike Hammond is also running, and they're both Republicans. So far we have 2 Republican candidates in that race, no Democrats. But again, it's 2 years off. What do you make of both the magnitude of this report, and also what is Jay's strategy here in raising so much money and trumpeting it so far ahead of the election?
Well, I think the the strategy is to run off any challengers, including Hammond. Look, I've raised, $250,000 for a county mayor's race. And so I am I'm a formidable opponent, and you don't want to run against me. And that's kind of the message he's wanting to send, I believe. And it's especially this early. It is 2 years out. It's usually that hasn't happened very often.
I mean, typically we don't even have declared candidates at this point.
No, and so I think that it is it's a strategy that so far isn't working. Hammond is not, doesn't sound scared, but it also shows how expensive running for county mayor is going to be in 2026.
Yeah, for sure. And, it allows Jay to lock down. I mean, I guess people aren't legally locked down. Just because people donate to his campaign now doesn't mean that they might not change their mind and donate to somebody else a year from now. But it's not just the money that he has on there, but a lot of his support. He has really solidified support among kind of the county Republican establishment. Multiple members of the Haslam family donated. Raja Jabran, Wes Stowers, Sharon Miller Price. I mean, these are sort of, the grand eminences of the Knox County Republican Party, and also people who, they've already made donations, but they have the capacity to make more donations in the future. And I think that it's not leaving Hammond with a whole lot. I mean, there are certainly other donors out there. Hammond, when I talked to him, said that he will file his own report in the coming week, and we'll see what's there. He acknowledged it's not going to be anything close to what Jay is posting, but he also said, he has time. It's still early. He's not worried about raising enough money to run, but it will be interesting to see, which kind of factions or power bases or whatever are kind of left out there for Hammond to try to draw on.
Yeah, and when you were listing off the names of Jay's donors, I was sitting here thinking, well, those are the same people who were donating to Becky Massey's campaign.
Very much.
Those very much that traditional establishment Republican base.
Yep. Well, and what that would suggest is that if there's an opening to run against Jay in the primary, it would be from the right, which has been true ever since Jay declared his candidacy. That's been obvious because Jay presents himself. I mean, again, he talks about himself as a conservative, pragmatic, common sense conservative. But Jay on commission has been very much a practical guy. He is not an ideological combatant. He is a Republican, but he's not somebody out there interested in fighting culture war issues or anything like that. And so that would suggest that, the best opening for somebody to run against him would be from the right. And that may be where Hammond can find some support. I think the challenge for Hammond there is that Hammond has also never presented himself as, a strongly ideological. He's very much a mainstream Republican guy. He's been a county commissioner, and now he's the criminal court clerk. Also very much presents himself as a problem solver and somebody who wants to be a good public servant. He has not, at least to date, ever really presented himself as some kind of, hard right standard bearer.
Yeah. The Jay and Hammond, you'd think, basically are looking at the same pool of supporters, and that's why this haul that Jay had is significant, because those are the exact same people that Hammond would probably approach, and some of them may donate to both of them.
Sure.
That happens, and so.
Especially when you get into sort of like the developer community, for example. A lot of times you'll get developers who spread around a little bit of money just in case. You never know.
Yeah.
Well, we will see what happens there, and we will certainly report Hammond's own numbers when they come in.
Yeah, we don't want to spend too much time on the 2026 election when we're still in the midst of the 2024 election. So.
I think there's a 2025 election to get through, too,
Oh, yes,
before we
there
even
is.
get to 2026.
Oh, we'll be talking about that in a minute. So.
Yeah, it just kind of never ends. All right, well, let's go ahead and look at what's coming up this week. We do have a couple of things on the calendar. County Commission is having its monthly agenda review session at 3 p.m. on Monday in the main assembly room of the City County building. One interesting item on the agenda this month is County Commissioner Kim Frazier has proposed expanding the Knox County School Board to include a couple of at-large seats, and she wants Commission to approve a resolution to get that, because this would have to be a charter change, to get this on the ballot for this fall so that county voters could vote whether they want to do this. The proposal is to add 2 at-large seats, which would essentially make the school board identical to the structure of county commission. School board right now has 9 district seats. County commission has 9 district seats plus 2 at-large seats, which Frazier is one of those at-large commissioners, and Larson J. is the other one. So, you can certainly see the rationale for this. Commission has a at-large seats. City Council has 3 at-large seats. Mm-hmm. And the argument always is that at-large positions allow you to have people who are looking at the big picture, not just the specific constituent-focused needs of their own district, but kind of like what's in the interest of the county as a whole. And in this case, it would be of the school system as a whole. And so you can certainly see that argument. There is a political dimension to this, which is that right now, countywide races in Knox County are almost always won by Republicans. Democrats haven't won a countywide race in almost 20 years. And so if you add countywide at-large seats to a partisan body, like the school board, functionally what that probably means, at least in the near future, is you are adding Republican seats. And so on the one hand, there's this kind of good government argument for at-large seats where you can have people with the broader perspective. On the other hand, there is clearly some partisan advantage, and Frazier is a Republican, to adding a couple of seats, that because the school board has been somewhat closely divided. It only right now has a 5-member Republican majority out of 9 seats. That could certainly change in our coming elections. Right now, it's very possible that the Republicans are going to come out of these elections with a larger majority on the school board. But then if you added these couple of at-large seats on top of that, you could functionally be adding a couple of Republican voices, and very much like county commission, where right now, and again, this can change during this election cycle too, but right now we only have 2 Democrats on an 11-member commission. And so if you think about the school board, if you had even 3 or 4 Democrats on an 11-member school board, they would be a much smaller minority than they are on a 9-member school board.
Yeah, that's. I think that's fair to say that this is pretty. It's going to benefit those who are who like the partisan school board and are Republicans. But it's kind of also interesting too, because there's this whole good governance part of it. One of the things that is, could be good about having at-large seats is that, if I don't get along with my district representative, I can go to an at-large representative. I'm still a constituent of theirs, unlike going to someone who represents a different district. So if you're, it's another avenue. You get more people who theoretically can represent your interests, on whatever body it is.
Right. You get more representation, and that is what at-large representatives on both the city council and county commission say, is that they provide another layer. On city council, there's 3 at-large representatives. So if you live in the city, you have your 1 district rep, but then you also have 3 other council members, and you are also a constituent of theirs. So that gives you 4 people to go and approach. And, that is true. And so it's kind of like, it's one of those situations where both things can be true.
Yes.
There can be a good government argument for it, and there can also be a very heavily partisan argument for it. And If this does get placed on the ballot, of course, it will be up to county voters, and it'll be interesting to see exactly how that case gets made to county voters. My guess is that there might be two kind of different campaigns for it. One would be the, hey, it's increasing representation for everybody, and then within the county Republican clubs and so forth, a lot of talk about make sure people vote for this because we're going to get more Republicans on the school board.
Well,
so you kind of approach it from both of those angles.
And also, as we have seen in the past, the law director will be in charge of writing the question that appears on the ballot.
Yep.
And as we have seen in the past, that can make a huge difference in how voters, when they actually go to vote, perceive this. If they
what was the last one? It came off. The last one came off as voting yes means no.
Well, that was in there was the ballot question about changing the law director's office from elected to appointed. That was presented totally as, do you really want to give up your right to elect this incredibly important office? Are you sure about that? You might want to. I mean, that's sort of how it was written.
Yeah.
And so in this case, right, because we do have a Republican law director, you could certainly write a ballot question that was essentially like, do you want to have more representation on the school board? Yeah. Do you want to have more, people looking out for your interests on the school board? So, yes, I think that's a good point. How it gets written could certainly help frame how people respond to it.
It almost seems that could invite legal challenges, could it not? To have a ballot question written like that? Couldn't someone come in and say that's unconstitutional?
Well, I mean, in the past, when there have been objections, the law department has just kind of shrugged, and they've never quite said, if you don't like it, sue us, but that's kind of been there. They like, there is no question that the law department has the legal, not just right, but actually legal obligation and responsibility to write the ballot questions. Yeah. And the reason for that is so that they write something that is legal and constitutional. But
fair.
Yes, obviously it gives them plenty of opportunity to,
there's no parameters on clear and understanding to normal people. So they like to work the legalese, as if they will, to make it a little confusing, if that is something they want passed or not passed.
It all depends on who
they
wants it
they
to
can
pass.
make it as confusing or as concise as they want to.
And, right, because again, the last one, that was my whole thing. I spent like 3 episodes on my show where I took a segment of it and says, yes means no. So if we went down the whole ballot, and every time we touched down on the ballot, it's worded stupid, the result of your answer is this,
right?
Because it never made any sense to me how it was worded. So we had to really, really, really break it down to get it to, like, if you vote yes, this is what happens. If you vote no, this is what happens.
Yep.
And a voter seeing that ballot question maybe wouldn't have known that actually we're very unique in the fact that that is how the law director works.
Right. The ballot question in that case could have been worded, do you want Knox County to remain the only county in the state with a partisan elected law director? But it wasn't written that way. Okay, and so then, Scott, there is a city council workshop also having to do with possible charter amendments.
Yes, Thursday at 4:30 in the main assembly room. Council is getting together to talk about what to do about the state law that was passed last year that's changing the way the city elections are run. I don't know why it's taken them so long to do this. But
there was some sort of talk for a while about whether they might challenge this law.
There was some talk about challenging the law, and I think that there was an effort to also address it legislatively, which went nowhere, obviously. But anyway, the way that the city elections are held now, these are district seats, the 6 district seats on council. The primary, in the primary, the only district residents or district voters can vote for their district representative. So if you live in the 1st district, you vote for the 1st district candidate, a candidate 1st district in the primary. But in the general election, and the top 2 finishers go on to the general election. The general election, it's a citywide vote. Well, there was a push a year ago by Elaine Davis, who is a Knox County Republican House member, to change that to where, well, first of all, Knoxville benefited from an exemption to the state law that says no district-only voting, essentially, and she got the pushed through legislation that removed that exemption. So now you can only vote for the representative of your district, which which means you can't vote for the if you live in the first district, you can't vote for the third, fourth, or fifth district person in the general election either. And you used to be able to do that. So, but anyway,
which is worth noting is because if we think about our other local bodies, county commission and school board, you can only vote in your own district in those too.
Yeah.
I mean, that is in fact how almost every office, every district office in both the county and the state is elected.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's Knoxville it's not unique. There are other towns that do this. Certainly, the only large city that does it. But the thing is, the election process is set out in the charter, in the city charter. Now, regardless of what the city charter says, they have to follow state law. So next year's election will, no matter what they say, is going to be held, district only, both primary and general election. But they've decided now that they need to change the charter. Well, they can only amend the charter through referendum in an even numbered year, which means it has to be on the ballot in November. And so they're going to be meeting on Thursday to discuss how to put what they want to put on the referendum in the referendum. And they've got options. For goodness sake, they could decide that the city needs 9 districts. They can they can make all of them at-large seats. They could do all, there are all kinds of things they could do. So they're going to have this workshop because they are going to have to be pretty quickly. Council has to pass an ordinance which requires 2 readings to put it on the ballot. It has to be done by a certain date for the election commission to put it on the ballot. All of that. So they're going to be meeting on Thursday to discuss all of those things, so and then there's no telling what will end up coming out of it. So.
Right, because as you say, I mean, there's certain changes that have to be made to comply with state law, but then they, while they are opening this up to look at, they could look at other things that have been discussed, like, for example, realigning the cycles of some of those elections and or changing the ways that at-large council members are elected. Like, they could look at all of those, but it's worth noting that no matter what, assuming they put something on the ballot, no matter what they put on the ballot, even if it fails, if people come out and look at that item and say, no, I don't want to make these changes, at least the things that have been changed by state law, this limitation of district representation voting to only district residents, that's going to happen next year regardless, even if they don't touch the charter, because that is the state law.
Right. It'll just be real confusing if you look at the charter and try to figure out how elections are supposed to work, and it doesn't work that way anymore.
Right. Yes, there's obvious advantages to having a charter that's actually in compliance with state law. Yeah,
one of the issues that they talked about was, the way the election cycles work is 5 of the district seats are elected in one cycle. The next cycle, the 5th district is the only district seat on the ballot. Mayor and judge and the 3 at large, but 5th district as well. Well, if they don't do anything, then in these years that the other 5 district races are on the ballot, 5th district people don't get to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So they would only vote every 4 years instead of every 2 years.
Right, and the 5th district does typically have the lowest turnout among district races right now, and I think that is partly because it's a little bit of an orphan district, and so they may talk about whether they want.
Yeah, they could shift that and the to adjust that to the cycle of the other district races, which would mean that the next person who is elected there could serve a 6-year term,
right,
or a 2-year term.
Right.
So to get that cycle, kind of lined up. But there are all kinds of things that could happen, but they don't have time to go through them all. Right. So that's they need to do something pretty quickly.
Well, whatever they do, we will come back next week to talk about it. I know we had a bit of a long episode here today, but a lot to talk about. I think the most important thing to remember is early voting is going on right now. If you are registered to vote, you can go and vote at any of 11 early voting locations around the county. And again, you can find all of the voting information at knoxvotes.org, and you can find all of our election coverage, again, outside the paywall at compassknox.com. We will be back next week to talk to you about anything that happens between now and then. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will see you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.